Hi everyone, welcome back to Newton Community Farms YouTube channel. Happy Wednesday. My name's Hope. I'm here again this week to talk about gardening and plants. And this week we'll be focusing on herbs in general and specifically on culinary and medicinal herbs, both of which can be grown. Certain varieties of both of those categories can be grown here in New England in your yards, in your gardens, and on your farms. So that's the overview of what we're going to talk about today. I just wanted to let you know that if you'd like to interact with our video at all today, so ask any questions, make any comments, answer my questions, or add anything to what I'm sharing with you, feel free to type it in the chat box, which is on the side of the screen. And it always makes it more fun to be able to engage with viewers. So if you caught us on Monday, you saw Cooking with Jay. And during that episode, we learned a couple of great recipes for preparing Brussels sprouts. So those videos from earlier this week and previous weeks all exist right here on our YouTube page. You can watch them anytime. And otherwise, tune in for Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Monday is cooking, Wednesday is gardening, and Friday is story time. So there's something for everyone, and we're really happy to be staying connected with our community. So with no further ado, let's jump into a little bit of herb talk and share what we know and see if we can learn a little bit more and get a little bit more excited about what we can grow in our gardens this spring for our health and for our culinary experiences. So herbs are a complement to our health and to our overall well-being in general. And I'm talking about two specific kind of categories of herbs, although we're kind of using those loosely. So the first that I've mentioned so far is culinary. And these are herbs that we're all fairly familiar with probably already. Some of those herbs are things you use in your kitchen to add some flavor to what you're cooking, to add some aroma to what you're preparing. So some culinary herbs that come to mind for me are rosemary, which is one of my favorites. I really like to cut that up very fine and roast it with potatoes or something else that it can complement with its flavors. And medicinal herbs are used for their medicinal properties, and they can be used for their benefits on our health. And later on in this episode, we'll talk about all the ways that those benefits can look and the different kind of subcategories of those benefits. To me, it's really exciting to see just how much medicine is built into the plant world already. So these medicinal plants that we're talking about, these herbs, something that we could grow or might see growing in New England that comes to mind for me is elderberry, which if you've ever seen elderberry growing, it flowers beautiful, beautiful bloom, dark purple berries, and you can find those. You can prepare your own syrups, which we'll also talk about today, or you can those already prepared in capsule form. They're really great for our immune health. People swear by them in cold and flu season, and of course, they're a complement to our healthcare regimen already. Of course, this type of medicine can mix with other types of medicine, but it's exciting to know in which ways we can be self-sufficient in our own health and what we can grow for ourselves. So there are a lot of hybrids, and almost every herb that we'll talk about today is a hybrid that falls somewhere on this spectrum between culinary herbs and medicinal herbs. And some herbs are both. Some fall right in the middle of the spectrum and are both great in the kitchen and great in the medicine cabinet, so to speak. So I like to make that distinction because those definitions are meant to be pretty fluid, at least in the way I'm going to be talking about these herbs today. And many of them are both culinary and medicinal. So when we're harvesting herbs and using herbs, we're using different parts of the plant. So it can be anything from the seed to the leaves or the stem or the root or even the bark of certain plants. So depending on what we're harvesting, we'll harvest it differently so that it can be used differently for our purposes. So today, the herbs that we will talk about will be Pretty straightforward, easy to grow, easy to use herbs, both in the kitchen and tincture. So we'll jump into first. So there are two subsets of culinary herbs when we're thinking about them in a gardening with a gardening lens. So I'm thinking of annual herbs and perennial herbs. Annual means they are planted annually, so they're planted each spring so that the plant can come back up and produce more of what we're looking for. So can anyone think of an annual herb that you might find in your garden, that you might see if you visited Newton Community Farm or a farm near you? Some of these herbs you can even find wild. Can anyone think of a guess? Can anyone wager a guess for an annual culinary herb? A guess in the chat box, cilantro, and that's absolutely correct. Cilantro is a really delicious leafy green herb that you'd plant each year in your garden. So that means you could plant it in a different spot each year. For example, if last year you had a raised bed that was full of vegetables and this year you want to fill it with fresh herbs and maybe some flowers, you can always be versatile with annual herbs, meaning you can move them around each year, which is a big draw for these herbs. And I got another guess, some types of basil, and that's absolutely true. And I have my little basil friend to show you all today. These were planted from seed a few weeks ago. And as you can see, they're starting to develop leaves that look just like basil leaves, but they're quite a bit smaller because they're still developing. So these leaves on the side that just kind of, they look like a run-of-the-mill sprout. And those are the leaves that emerge from the seed when the seed germinates. And then these are called the true leaves. So they look truly like the plant, and they signal to the grower or to whomever finds them that, I'm a basil plant, and then you can begin to tell that that's what it is. So we'll be growing basil at Newton Community Farm this year in heaps. So we're excited about that. And basil is absolutely annual, so we'll plant it every year. And can anyone think of a perennial herb? So perennial means we plant it once and it will continue to come up each year on its own from the same root or root system. So these are herbs that you might plant on the edges of your garden or someplace where you know you'll want them to be for the long haul. So they're not versatile in the way that you can move them around each season, but they're reliable. And they could take up a space that maybe you want to be reserved. Very pungent herb like rosemary. If you plant rosemary, that will come up each year from the same root. We also have lavender. If you've ever grown a lavender bush, you know that that comes up again every year. And then something like mint. Mint is very prolific. And I actually lived in a home once that had mint growing all along the side of the driveway. And it was absolutely almost out of control, but it was really fresh. And you could go outside, pick some mint, put it in your water pitcher, and you got all the benefits of mint really easily from your driveway. So it can grow wild, and quite often it does. But if you like to grow it in your garden or in your yard, you can plant it and it's reliable. And it can take over sometimes, but we like that if we're wilding our space. So I've got a couple of plants here that are more so on the spectrum of culinary, but they also have benefits that are medicinal. So here's our first plant. It's not my best drawing, but I tried to get the color right. It's a very muted green. It's a very foresty green. It has a very earthy scent. It's a perennial plant. You can use it as a garnish on a meal. You can chop it up into a stuffing or into a vegetable roast. They have very velvety leaves. And medicinally, these are used for digestive issues. And you might also see this in a bundle that people can light, and it can release a scent all around the room. And I see a guess in the chat box that is sage, and that's correct. So sage we see in the kitchen, and we also see as a digestive aid. So that was my goal, to illustrate that these herbs can really fall on both sides of the spectrum. So I got a comment in the chat box that says, if you want to control your mint in your garden, you should put it in a pot and bury the pot. So that means like a little gardening container or a gardening pot of, I'm assuming, any size. I've actually never tried this, but it sounds like it would do the trick. I think it sounds like it would contain the root system so that the roots don't grow out more and more each year. So that sounds great. I think if you're thinking about planting mint this year, you could maybe give that a try. Put your plant into a pot and keep it contained in a certain part of your garden. I have another hybrid herb that is also medicinal. So if you can see that, okay. This is another perennial. It's culinary and medicinal. Another that aids in digestion, soothes an upset stomach. It has many vitamins and minerals. And if you've ever smelled this herb in its oil form, you might know that it's great for headaches. So I actually have a little bit of this herb in oil form, and if I have a headache, I just rub it on my temples, and it makes a difference. It's very energizing, and it kind of resets my compass a little bit. Has anyone seen this herb? Or can anyone recognize this herb from my attempt at drawing it? So this is peppermint, and most mints have this similar sort of spiky leaves and deeper green. So something like spearmint would look the same. This is something that we could totally use in a culinary sense, and medicinally we can also use it. If we grow our own mint, we can dry the leaves, crush it up, and add it to some kind of a tea or make our own herbal blend, which is something that I definitely want to move into talking about. So when we're talking about medicinal plants more specifically, there are definitely flowers that are medicinal, herbs and plants that are medicinal that wouldn't have as much of a use in the kitchen, or we wouldn't maybe be familiar with how we would use them in the kitchen, but they may have culinary benefits, have medicinal benefits, and they're probably more well known for their medicinal benefits. So for starters, I would say that all plants are definitely medicinal. It's been clinically proven that even 15 minutes outside can lower the levels of cortisol in your body. Cortisol is one of our stress hormones in our bodies, and being around nature and being around plants can have that kind of a chemical balancing effect or a chemical influence on our bodies. So in some sense, all plants are medicinal. But for today's talk, we'll kind of be talking from an herbal medicine perspective, which is a very old way of incorporating the use of plants into an overall health regimen. So when we're talking about building any kind of apothecary in our home or using any kind of herbal health additions, there are a few subcategories of actions or ways that plants can engage with our health. So there are adaptogens. So these are the herbs or plants that would help our bodies manage stress the best. So an example of an adaptogen, if you've heard of it, is ashwagandha. And these kind of plants can also help depression and anxiety, and they can boost our brain functioning. So adaptogens are really, really powerful plants and herbs. There are immune modulating herbs. So these support immune health in general. They're really great around the cold or flu season. They're really great right now while we're all collectively working on staying healthy. Examples of immune boosting or immune modulating herbs and plants are elderberry, which we talked about before, and echinacea, which is another very popular herbal supplement that people might incorporate during the winter time when we're fighting colds, or maybe right now. There are carminatives, which are pretty much digestive aids. They help with upset stomachs and indigestion and any kind of digestive issues that we might experience. So we saw that in peppermint, and we talked about that quickly with ginger. So ginger is a definitely a culinary herb, but it's something that has that carminative effect. It has the ability to soothe an upset stomach. You might I think a lot of us have tried ginger in a medicinal fashion through tea. I know that's one of my favorites. It's a great way to end the day. There's often no caffeine in herbal teas like ginger tea. So that can be a great addition both for our health and for our feelings of well-being, incorporating that kind of ritual, having tea at the end of the day into our days of isolation while we're all kind of figuring out how to exist in this new paradigm. Another category of medicinal herbs are anti-inflammatory. So this helps reduce inflammation in the body, which is great for overall health. This can also, or rather, this category of herbs can also be used to address allergies in the springtime. So right now, this can be a good time to incorporate anti-inflammatory herbs while spring is springing, and those of us who experience allergies are navigating that. An example of this is nettle. If anyone's ever tried nettle, I believe it's technically an antihistamine, so it can be used in conjunction with any allergy medicine, or if you have very mild allergies, you could try something with nettle in it, whether that's a supplement or a tea. And then there are also antimicrobial herbs, so those help combat any harmful microbes in the body. And then there's nutritive herbs, which support general overall well-being, and that's kind of the categories of herbs that are medicinal, that have medicinal qualities. So I have a couple more fun drawings, and if anybody would like to guess which kind of medicinal herbs they're representing, we can learn a little bit more about a few of these herbs. Has anyone seen this herb before? So these herbs begin by flowering on a tree, and the bloom is very beautiful, very fragrant, and then these berries appear, accompanied by shading leaves. They're not grapes, although they do sort of look like them. They're definitely a purple kind of a berry, but they have a much deeper hue. They're almost black sometimes. So that you see around cold and flu season. It's a popular supplement that people sometimes rely on. It's rich in vitamins A and C. It has antioxidants, as a lot of berries tend to have. So this is elderberry. So elderberry is a fairly popular cold and flu remedy in the medicinal plant realm, I suppose. It can't quite compete with Tylenol, but it has definite benefits. It's been used for a very long time for its immune health benefit. A great way that if you have this plant growing anywhere in your neighborhood or on your property, or if you're interested in growing an elderberry plant, these are really great for using in a syrup, and that's something that you can do right at home. So for the sake of today, I'm thinking of ways that we can engage our own land and our own kitchens in creating this medicine. So of course, we can always go out and get our elderberry syrups or elderberry capsules or order them online. But for the sake of this discussion, there are also a lot of ways that we can grow these things in our own space and use our own knowledge of how to deal with these plants and with these herbs to create our own healing things. So with syrup, these can be made into a syrup and dosed however we'd like throughout the cold and flu season or throughout this virus season that we're in. The berries are the medicinal part of this fruit, so the leaves don't have the medicinal value that the berries do. And the berries can be boiled down in a pot, similar to how you might boil like a berries for a jam, and you can add honey, you can add spices like cinnamon or clove, and you can boil this down into a syrup that you can substitute for any kind of other supplement that you might be taking, or you can add it to your health regimen. You can make it sweet enough that your kids might want to try it, but not so sweet that you know, don't know what's in it or that it's loaded with sugar. So that's elderberry. And we have one more image for another medicinal plant. Has anyone seen these flowers before? Either growing wildly or in your garden or on a farm. These are really beautiful flowers and they're great for attracting pollinators. And they're also immune modulating, so they're great for our health. They're another kind of buzzword in alternative health when it comes to supplements that we can take to feel well during cold and flu season. So this flower is echinacea. So the petals are kind of a purpley pink, and the centers are a deep orange with some dark brown shading to it. Oh, and I see a guess for echinacea in the chat box. So someone recognizes this flower. So echinacea, this can be grown all over New England. So if you have taste for flowers, if you're looking for some ideas for flowers for pollinators for your garden, or just flowers to take up some space in your yard, echinacea is a beautiful flower. They add kind of a wilding effect to your space, but they can be harvested and hung upside down and dried upside down. And the petals can be crushed and used in an herbal blend. So you can steep them in hot water mixed with anything else that you'd like, and you can make your own herbal blend of echinacea tea. So when I say herbal blend, I mean it's a variety of plant herbs or flowers or berries or any part of the plant that's harvestable, and it's boiled in water as you would tea leaves. But these herbal blends can just be flower petals. They don't have to include tea leaves if you don't want them to. So typically with an herbal blend, there's a base. So that's the main kind of star of the show. So if you're growing echinacea and you're feeling a little bit sick and you want to support your immune system by adding some echinacea into your diet, you can dry those flowers. You can crush up the dried leaves, and you can always store them in a sealable jar, ideally glass, and it can be ready for you anytime you're feeling a tickle in your throat or you're feeling a little bit run down. You can take those leaves and steep them with a complement herb. So that could be something like spearmint or something to add. You can make your own blend. And then you can add something like honey to it, or cinnamon or clove. And you can always add tea leaves to these. It's kind of up to your own creative interests. So can anyone think of any other medicinal herbs that they've heard about or that they've recognized in their gardens before? I'm thinking of the basil plant that I have. There are a lot of varieties of basil. So this is one called Prospera, and it's a pretty standard green basil, but there are also a lot of different varieties of basil. There's holy basil. It's also called Tulsi, and that can be grown here in New England. You can grow that in your garden. It has similar looking leaves, but these holy basil grow like a kind of purple flower on top that sort of looks like lavender on top. And those can be used for teas. They can be used in a culinary setting. So there are tons of plants that can be incorporated into the garden. And I have another suggestion in the chat box, which is lavender. And that's absolutely right. Lavender is an herb that can be very calming before you go to bed. It can be very calming for the nervous system, and something that you can add to your regimen. If you have it in oil form, you can dry it in the same way you would echinacea by hanging it upside down, and then you can smell that. I have a A question is witch hazel an herb? Do you know? Witch hazel. I believe it is technically an herb. I think it's a perennial. And I know you can grow witch hazel here in New England. I would have to look up its medicinal properties, but it is an herb and it can be used sometimes if you have a more holistic dietary supplement and you read the ingredients, you might see witch hazel. I also see St. John's wort. St. John's wort is a really great herb that in herbalism is used for general depression, anxiety, and overall mental well-being. So that's a very popular herb as well. And I've never seen that growing actually, but it's another herb that I believe can be grown pretty prolifically in New England. So I hope that this kind of gets everybody a little bit excited about seeing which herbs might be welcomed addition to your gardens this spring and summer, and what things could add health to the other plants that they're growing around. So if you're thinking about companion planting at all, flowers are a really great companion plant for our gardens, and herbs are as well. So whether they are a medicinal herb or a medicinal flower or just a pollinator or a culinary herb, they can really add a lot of color and life and variety to the space that you're growing. So I hope this gets everyone a little bit excited about that. And before we wrap up, I want to update on our tomato plants that we seeded together on the YouTube channel 2 weeks ago. So these were actually the variety I just have one variety right now, and they are full tomatoes. And we seeded them 2 weeks ago together, and last week we checked in on them, and they had 2 leaves, the same leaves that we saw on the basil that kind of sprout up when the seed emerges from the soil. And we thinned them a bit, which means that if 2 cells germinated or 2 seeds germinated in one cell, we would pull up one little seedling and maybe throw it in the yard or throw it in the compost so that each seedling can have their own little space and they don't have to compete with neighboring seedlings for light or nutrients. So we've had a lot of growth over the past week, and I'd love to show you. So these will be going in the learning garden at Newton Community Farm. So the variety is purple bumblebee tomatoes. And if you can see, since last week, the tomatoes have started to, and they smell like tomato plants really already. So these are the truly growth. The stem is also really important in their growth. If you think about the stem of the plant like its neck, it's very integral in sending its nutrients up from the soil into the top of the plant. So yeah, these are really beginning to take on tomato shape, and you can tell what they are now. So maybe by next week they'll all be in bigger containers. And once it gets hot and a lot more sunny, they'll go outside in the soil at Newton Community Farm. Okay, so that's the end of today's chat. I hope everybody has learned a little bit more about culinary and medicinal herbs and flowers. If anyone has anything that they would like to add, you can pop it right in the chat box. And otherwise, keep visiting us at our YouTube channel. On Friday, we have story time with Sue. And last week, she did a really great chat, and it's just such a highlight of the week to be able to listen to her storytelling. And then next Monday, again at 1, we'll have Jay, and he's been covering cooking. And there's a lot of information that we've learned from him as well, and you can see those videos below. So with no further ado, we'll sign off for the day. Thanks for tuning in again, and stay healthy and stay well, and good luck in your gardens, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.